welcome everybody to the Building Wealth and Creating Impact with Real Estate Development, or Developer Academy, as we're calling it here. This is the first session that we're going to be presenting on the vision for smart growth. So here you'll see on the screen that we've got 8 weekly sessions together that I'm very excited about. We are going to make this as actionable as possible for you to actually find development opportunities and ideally make money while we're still in this course here. So if everybody gets into that mindset that what I'm going to be presenting here is really going to be exactly what it is that you need in order to actually start finding opportunities, securing them ideally, and then making money from them. I'm going to, again, make this extremely actionable. The first session this week on the vision for smart growth development is really going to set the context for what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and we'll start to touch upon how to go about finding the specific opportunities. I won't go down the list here, but you can see these breakdowns of the various weekly sessions, and then you can also see that in the Kajabi learning platform. So the context, right? For smart growth, it really addresses some of the major primary issues in our society. So we need to talk a little bit about what it is that we have the potential of contributing to in pursuing smart growth development. So when we talk about smart growth development, we're talking about the ability to pursue economic development, either from the redevelopment or ground-up development of buildings, and promotion of businesses within those buildings. So with real estate, it's really about providing the built environment that enables our society to operate, either living, working, or playing. And so real estate as a driver of economic development, either from the buildings themselves or from the businesses that are operating in those buildings to contribute to the economic growth of our society. Then on the environmental sustainability side, by developing the right type of real estate in the right locations, designed in the right way for green building standards, integrating clean energy, and providing amenities for sustainable transportation, the real estate itself really becomes the primary node for developing a sustainable society, specifically from a carbon perspective. So, largely when we're talking about environmental sustainability, we're talking about the impact that real estate has on climate change. And then social prosperity. With real estate, it can be a real significant driver for job creation, for increasing living standards, for providing urban housing for a variety of people, and then actually generating tax revenues. So as projects are starting, as you start to pursue projects and get started in this business, a lot of these goals are going to be less attainable, but as you start to develop as a developer, you'll be able to have a more direct impact on a lot of these different areas and starting to factor them into your projects that you're going to be able to pursue. Okay, so from economic development perspective, we're again talking about buildings and businesses. So buildings are one of the primary generators for economic growth, right? From tax revenues, for example, property values, the ability for people to actually work and be productive in those buildings. There's a significant benefit that buildings provide to the economy, and I think real estate itself is one of the leading drivers of overall economic growth. And then, as I said, the businesses that are factored into those buildings, both professional businesses, so being able to develop office space for professionals to be productive at work, as well as neighborhood businesses, so the businesses that actually have a more direct impact in the local environment, especially from the street level. So our goal here is to really promote the development or redevelopment of buildings, and to find people who are interested in developing their businesses that are also contributing to society, both in terms of what's happening locally on the street level, as well as what's happening typically above in the office space that should be developed in the city. From an environmental sustainability perspective, there's 4 key areas that real estate itself can be a significant contributor towards. So developing property in the right location, and we'll get into right location, that's largely what smart growth is all about, is the right type of location to plan and build buildings that build community and create a more connected network for our society. And then the actual operation of the building, once it's either fully renovated or built from the ground up to new high green building standards, again, it lowers the carbon footprint of that building. And then integrating solar energy into a building as one example of a type of renewable resource that could be factored into your project, the ability to offset whatever remaining energy consumption occurs from that highly efficient building that you pursue. And then, the really interesting thing about real estate is that you can actually factor transportation amenities into the structure that actually enables people to have a low carbon lifestyle, even outside of the property that they're either living or working in, by providing electric vehicle infrastructure, car shares, or bike amenities. These are all various characteristics that we at Smart Growth Inc. pursue in our developments, and we are promoting other people to factor these into their projects. Again, we are not necessarily just doing this for out of the goodness of our heart, but there's actually a real strong demand from the marketplace for these types of characteristics. People want to actually live, work, and play in places or buildings that are aligned with these increasingly emerging values of sustainability. And then from a social perspective, smart growth has the potential of really contributing to the social prosperity of our cities and our society as a whole. So through the pursuit of smart growth development, you have the ability to help create jobs, either entry-level jobs in the local businesses, neighborhood businesses that you're trying to factor into the projects that you're pursuing, workforce jobs, professional jobs, again, if you are interested in pursuing things like office development or work-live environments. And then generally a higher living standard. So the ability to be a developer gives you that opportunity to pursue community building, right? So the ability to try and bring people together to connect in a more satisfying way. So by participating in the design and the development process, you can find ways to actually bring people together and create community. Same thing goes with mixed use areas. If you can actually be a contributor to the vibrancy of a place, it really gives an experience to the environment that you're trying to create, either for the local residents or for people who are coming into the city to visit it and experience it on their travels. And then, open space is another opportunity that a lot of people don't actually think about, but there's increasingly becoming opportunities to develop open space in creative ways that provide solace in the city. And then, as urbanization is continuing to increase and the shift globally is for people to continue to move into the cities, where in the next, couple of decades, the majority of people in the world will be living in cities, that need for urban housing is continuing to increase. And we're seeing that in most cities in this country and around the world, that there's just a lack of supply for a variety of different people, whether it's students or families or workforces or people who are more destitute and who need assistance from an affordability standpoint, and even market rate housing. So the ability to just provide more housing for people in the right areas and the right cities and develop community is really what smart growth has the promise of helping. And then same thing goes with the productivity of the city as a whole to generate revenues that can be reinvested into the local area from property taxes, sales taxes, and income taxes. Okay, so with that context in mind, let's dive into how smart growth development is able to help catalyze the development in those areas. So in general, smart growth, as I've talked about before, is an urban planning and transportation theory that concentrates growth in compact, walkable urban centers. And this is basically as opposed to the traditional paradigm of kind of sprawling out and decentralizing our growth patterns, especially in the United States. In Europe and the UK, the terms compact city or urban intensification have often been used to describe a similar concept. But essentially what smart growth is trying to do is to promote longer range regional sustainability over a shorter term focus. The sustainability goals of smart growth are to basically achieve a unique sense of community in place, expand the range of transportation, employment, and housing choices, and equitably distribute the costs and benefits of development. So this diagram at the bottom is what you call a transect that many people who are focused on really fleshing out the academic understanding of smart growth have promoted, where essentially we're trying to focus that development of our society in the central areas and let kind of the natural world remain, while we focus on making the areas or the land that we've allocated to cities more productive and more well organized. So just to kind of put it up against the traditional paradigm of suburban sprawl, smart growth is really kind of a centralizing has a centralizing emphasis to connect the city and connect people who are living and working and playing in those environments. It's promoting high density as opposed to low density and mono use that we've seen out in the suburbs. It's an orientation towards public transportation versus a dependency on an automobile. Its emphasis is on walkability and infilling the land that has not been well utilized. It's a real strong emphasis on people versus kind of systems and how cars especially are operating in our environment. It's a real emphasis on higher diversity and mixed land uses to create that sense of vibrancy and aliveness. Okay, so the need for smart growth can be broken up, and this is kind of touching upon what we've just talked about, but it's important for you to really internalize and understand what it is that we're working towards, right? What it is, the type of development that we're interested in pursuing, and the money that we're looking to make, again, is in service of the impact that we're trying to achieve. So while this can seem relatively academic, the more that you internalize this and the more that you really understand what we're working towards, the better and more motivated you will be to actually continue to build your wealth, right? Because building wealth is really in service of being able to create more impact and more creative impact in the world. So the key concepts for smart growth: urban infill, transit-oriented, mixed-use development with net zero energy buildings on complete streets that create a sense of place and also provide a sense of open space for the people who are living, working, and playing in these urban environments. This is a little diagram that kind of shows some of the key assets that we need to focus on developing in our societies, and what this course will start to help you be able to pursue. So when it comes to urban infill, again, this is about making better use of the land that we've dedicated to our urban life. So in the cities that have already been under development for the last centuries, and in many cases around the world for even longer than that, there is still a lot of land that's not quite utilized in the most efficient way. So our emphasis here is really to make cities better, make the land have a higher and better use. And we need to add higher density to create more walkable places. So the thinking is, by putting more people together in a well-organized way, we'll be able to create more vibrant places where people are going to be more happy because they are connecting with one another, and they're going to be stuck in their car in traffic less. So again, this is very distinctly different from what the current paradigm has been over the last 50 to 100 years, especially in America, where the emphasis has been on cars providing that freedom. But in turn, it's actually really kind of disconnected us from what's most important. So we really want to focus on trying to find opportunity to build up as opposed to out, basically using land that's green field, development out in the countryside. We want to really try and focus on making cities better. Then when it comes to transit oriented, we want to focus higher density along corridors with public transit and that promote walkability and bikeability, again, to reduce car dependence. What's interesting is that most city planners have been putting an emphasis on this type of development anyways. So as we'll start to see when we get into understanding the zoning of cities, many of these concepts have already been implemented. So you'll find that by just looking for the higher density zones that have already been identified or created by the cities, that you're going to basically be pursuing this type of development one way or the other. And then, so the idea is to basically build up these commercial corridors and then gradually step them down from higher rises to mid rises to low rise. So the ability to concentrate growth and development and create a more vibrant primary corridor for retail businesses to thrive, for offices to be available for people to walk to work, and then ideally to have people live right on top of all of that activity. Okay, so mixed use development essentially blends the residential, commercial, and cultural, institutional, and other industrial uses all together, where functions are physically and functionally integrated, and that provides an ability for pedestrians to kind of be connected with the real estate. So the real emphasis that we have in smart growth is this type of mixed use development. Now, many people in the past have chosen not to pursue this type of development because it has been a little bit more challenging to finance, but many banks and institutions are becoming more aware and of the need for this type of development. So these are essentially just other uses that are factored into the pro forma that you end up sending to a lender. And again, the importance here is that you can develop mixed use buildings, which certainly when you first start in this business, and as I've been able to start to do myself, is plan out buildings that are mixed use themselves. But then that can go further out by actually addressing neighborhoods or whole master plans for master development, such as what's pictured here at Santana Row in San Jose. But if you've ever experienced that type of mixed-use environment, you really understand that there can be a vibrancy that's created for other people coming to visit that place, as well as people who are living and working in that environment. And then, in order to really transform our built environment to a more sustainable way, we need to basically pursue net zero energy buildings. So the building codes are increasingly getting strict year over year, but there's still a lag behind actually integrating solar into the building that basically allows for all of the energy, all the electricity at least, to be generated on site and factored into the community itself, so that essentially there's no more dependence on other off-site sources of energy. Now, sometimes this is going to be a challenging thing to achieve because of constraints like rooftop space or higher intensity uses that use more electricity. But as a developer who's basically envisioning projects and seeing opportunities, and basically hiring people such as architects and engineers to stick to the program that you want to achieve, you can basically emphasize to them that you want your building to be oriented towards the sun that can actually capture the most passive solar, and you want it to be designed in a super high efficient way, or you want the rooftops to be conducive to putting solar on top of them. So you really have the ability to set out a clear vision, clear guidelines for the professionals that you're going to be hiring to design these buildings to achieve. So complete streets are something that we are very much in favor of, and we believe that if you find an opportunity to develop a building on one of these streets, it really increases the value of the property. But complete streets academically are streets essentially for everyone. They are designed and operated to enable safe access for all users, pedestrians, people who are walking, biking, motorists, transit riders of all ages and abilities. So this is something that people who are interested in pursuing smart growth development are really in need of advocating for from their local areas, to actually make streets more focused on everybody as opposed to just cars. So by creating this sort of fabric of the city, and advocating for these types of solutions, it really enables you to take advantage of the property that you are going to be able to develop in these areas. So basically, we're looking to activate the streets. So our thinking is that if we have people, who are out and about, and you feel connected to others, that's really going to give you your sense of community. That's going to, really going to want to make you want to stay in a certain place. On place, real estate can basically create an environment that makes people feel like they are connected to time and space. So, to get a little bit philosophical, you are basically entering into the business of creating places. So the more vibrant, memorable, and experiential places that you can create, the more vibrant that your project is going to become. So we have the ability to create a sense of place where people can connect with themselves and each other in a deeper way. So, looking at real estate as essentially the container for the experiences that people are going to have either by themselves or with others. You start to have the vision for what the potential really is here in pursuing real estate development. And this is just an example of a shipping container project or prefabricated unit that can essentially be assembled in such a way to provide that same sort of experience. So there's increasingly creative ways to create that sense of place that don't necessarily mean building a high-rise in the downtown environment. Okay, and then open space, it's an increasingly important thing for people to think about how they can either participate or promote more creative ways of having open spaces. These can range from anything from playing fields in highly maintained environments to relatively natural landscapes. But there are opportunities out there to create open spaces that actually have multiple streams of revenue to them, and they're essentially privately owned. So finding ways to even pursue development of open spaces is becoming increasingly interesting to us, because we see the important role that they play in the urban environment. So essentially, open spaces can provide the aesthetic and psychological relief from the urban landscape. So they can provide a connection with nature, a balance to the urban masses. They can spur economic growth based upon the programming of those open spaces. They can spur economic growth, as I just said, provide social retreats, and facilitate outdoor recreation. So this picture here is of a park in downtown Dallas that was created with multiple streams of revenue, and has really created an important asset for the city. So this is definitely an example that more people should be interested in pursuing. Okay, so the opportunity at hand is really what we're tasked with internalizing. So everything that I've just covered is really kind of setting the stage and setting the context for what it is that we're interested in doing when it comes to smart growth, and how smart growth can satisfy a critical need in society, both economically, environmentally, and socially. So what's the opportunity here? Essentially, our role as developers is to acquire X in location Y to develop Z. So this basically becomes the orienting principle of finding the opportunities that will actually produce a higher and better use of land and contribute in those ways that we've talked about thus far. So location type is really what we've just talked about. And I'll give you some more specific criteria to actually look for when it comes to location. So many people have heard that adage in real estate that it really is location, location, location. And I definitely agree with that. And smart growth essentially is all about location, about developing the right thing in the right location. And then when it comes to asset type, this is where we're actually going to be looking for what's currently out there, what real estate exists that we can essentially acquire to then carry out a different various projects that contribute, again, in all of those ways that we've said smart growth does. Okay, so let's get into location a little bit deeper. So the target locations here, where should you focus your efforts? These are some of the key characteristics or areas that we've really been focused on finding opportunities to contribute. So walkable urban places or walk-ups. There's been a lot of academic study of what neighborhoods around the country in the US, and this is kind of US focused at this point, but what neighborhoods are already pursuing and are characterized as walk-ups. High scoring locations, so using criteria such as walk score to actually figure out where the best locations are from a walkability, bikeability, and transit-oriented location. On the transit-oriented location side, being close to a fixed rail station, in our minds, is kind of one of the primary ways to actually feel like your development is connected into a much wider area. So finding these opportunities around these fixed rail stations are probably some of the biggest opportunities and the biggest holders of value, especially in downturns. So, to see land in close proximity to those environments is really going to be what is a market driver for people wanting to rent or buy in those locations. And then using higher density zones. So as I said, looking at what the city has already designated in various areas to be that driver to find opportunities for development on existing sites. In mixed-use neighborhoods is another way, and we're going to get into all these. So let me just run down the list here. So covered by specific area plans, we'll talk about how cities have go even further than the general plan to actually define exactly what they want to see on various sites in a various location. Along commercial corridors or bike boulevards that have already been dedicated as kind of sustainable throughways, where by developing a building on that corridor, it starts to contribute to that sense of place. And then obviously near popular recreational areas. So anywhere that's already starting to get that sense of a vibe of, oh, this is someplace that they want to be and work and play. That's really what we're focused on trying to find in terms of opportunities. Okay, so there's an organization called Smart Growth America, which is a nonprofit organization nationally focused on promoting smart growth. And so they've done a whole study and they published a ranking last year in 2016 called Foot Traffic Head. But they basically said that there's 619 regionally significant walkable urban places, or walk-ups, in the nation's 30 largest metro areas. So they've basically done a lot of the legwork already to basically say, all right, here are the neighborhoods that you should be focused on throughout the country. And obviously, we're in a particular location. I think everybody on this call here is in the Bay Area, but understanding what areas have already been designated as walk-ups will already give you one of the primary orienting factors for looking for sites to acquire. So these 30 metros represent 46% of the national population, and 54% of the national GDP. So this just goes to show that these walk-ups are kind of the biggest economic drivers that can be further developed in order to even boost that even higher, and especially as more and more people are moving into these cities. So we won't go into the method that they've used to actually define these walkable urban places, but one of the homework assignments from tonight is to actually download this report and look at both the criteria that they've used to define walkable places as opposed to drivable suburbs, and then the actual list in your local area that you'll be able to start to see where those areas are that you can already start to pursue and get familiar with in order to pursue developments yourself. This is a list basically of all of those top 30 metros ranked by their contribution to being characterized as a walk-up. And you'll see here in the second column that the majority of these have a significant amount of neighborhoods, right? So in the Bay Area, for example, there's 56 walk-ups that they've identified. And so again, you'll be able to look at the list of neighborhoods here that are already in line with that, and you don't really need to pursue much more than starting to get familiar with the zoning of those walk-ups and how to actually find ways to get projects approved that will both make you money and contribute to the further development of the walk-ups. Okay, so high scoring locations. So if you're not familiar with walkscore.com, it's one of the most well-used resources to actually define the desirability of a particular location, either from a walking perspective or a transit perspective or a bike perspective. So most of the time we'll look for an opportunity and we'll immediately plug it into WalkScore to actually figure out, how this location stacks up amongst others. So seeing this as one of the primary ways to determine the value potential in doing a project there or buying a piece of property there is probably one of the best ways to think about orienting your targeting efforts. As we've said, fixed rail stations are a no-brainer in our minds. If you can be within a half-mile radius of a transit station, that would be ideal. Again, this is to help contribute to the justification to go car-free and to promote walkable communities. So in our minds, walkable communities are really needed in these transit-oriented locations, so it not only serves the local community, but also serves the regional environment as well. Okay, so higher density zones. As we will start to see and as you'll start to pursue, you'll start to understand how zoning really does, at the end of the day, define where a development site is or what the development potential of a site is. So in higher density zones, whether those are residential or commercial, we're really looking for opportunities to capture that development potential, and ideally by right, meaning the code has already stated a specific dimensionality and number of units that you can add in a particular location, given that it's already been identified to be in a particular area. So, at the end of the day, we're looking for ways to add or create lots or subdivide lots, add units, build higher. These higher density zones will have less constraints for actually getting projects approved, and will actually reveal opportunities to convert existing assets in those zones to be able to actually make them productive assets again. A lot of the examples that we're going to be doing or giving in this presentation here are from Oakland, California, which is where we'll be doing our mastermind at the beginning of November. And so you'll start to see that, for example, in this picture here, there's a mix of C-oriented zones and R-oriented zones. But you'll start to, as you start to recognize various zones, you should have the criteria, the development standards in mind in order to start driving around or using Google Maps to actually identify opportunities where something higher and better can go on a piece of land. So we'll go into this further. I think the next slide, here, mixed-use neighborhoods. So, either you're orienting around the zones or you're starting to orient around mixed-use neighborhoods that are already underway. And most of the time they'll be connected because the city has identified a particular neighborhood as having a particular focus, either on residential or commercial. But being able to find opportunities that have utilized land in those neighborhoods is probably one of the biggest factors for starting to target opportunities. You really want to look for ways to activate the streets, especially in these neighborhoods on the primary corridors, such as in Oakland, Telegraph Avenue. anything on these commercial corridors should be an opportunity to activate the street and make it a greater sense of place for people. And then the big thing in our minds to actually make these truly sustainable areas is to actually build more residential units above the ground floor commercial space. So as opportunities are explored, in starting to develop a vision for, oh, that should have a number of more floors on top of the ground floor retail. That's kind of the mindset that you want to be in as you're starting to explore these areas, basically without having people right on top and higher density on top of the retail or the commercial businesses. It's going to be harder to sustain operation for them. Okay, so beyond general plans, which the general plan essentially defines the zones in a city. And so you have to think about what city that you're going to start to get familiarized with. And I'm going to be basically giving you a task of starting to dig in a little bit deeper to your own city, the city that you want to actually start to help develop. Because at the end of the day, you have to actually begin to understand a market in order to contribute and to start to see the opportunities that other people who are coming in from the outside are not necessarily going to see. So in Oakland, for example, there are 6 specific plans that have been published over the years that have basically given certainty to developers coming into an area in order to pursue projects. Oftentimes these specific plans do other work that makes the approval process easier. For example, they conduct environmental reviews of particular areas to ensure that, in pursuing a development site, you don't have to do an expensive environmental study yourself. So, this is a picture here on the bottom right-hand corner of the West Oakland specific plan. Essentially, they've looked at site by site in a given area and have designated it as either an opportunity site or something that is just existing. So they kind of do the legwork for you a lot of the times to start to take this plan and start to look for opportunities yourself. And what's really interesting is as cities are doing these specific plans and they take a long time to complete, you'll start to understand that there are ways to kind of get ahead of the curve as the city starts to continue to publish these types of plans. You can actually get on the ground floor and find ways to profit. So for example, in Oakland, the downtown area specific plan is underway right now. And so, to many people outside of the city, they don't necessarily know what opportunities are existing. But once the city starts to publish it, it really becomes more clear and obvious for even outsiders to start to take advantage of the opportunities. Okay, so bike boulevards are another great way to start to orient where you should be focusing your efforts in promoting smart growth. So many times cities will promote bike plans or walk or pedestrian plans that provide you new maps and perspectives on how they see the city developing. So as much as possible as a developer, you want to be aligned with the city. The city is basically is not an adversary, but it's an ally in this, because they're basically providing you certainty for you to invest in the market, and either your time, your energy, or your capital. And so contributing to complete streets, for example, on the Telegraph corridor, is a great way to find opportunities to contribute to the local area. And then, as we said, recreational areas. These are kind of a little bit more obvious than zones, for example, because many people don't even realize that zones really do define the development potential. But recreational areas such as lakes or waterfronts are kind of obvious ones, but needless to say, you can still find opportunities around these key assets to develop. Okay, so when we're talking about assets, we need to think of them as the things that you're interested in changing. So from an asset perspective, one kind of division that we've thought through is residential, commercial, or land, right? Land that basically does not currently have something defined, either residential or commercial. Now the zone will basically dictate oftentimes what can go there, whether residential or commercial or mixed. But the land as an asset type itself is kind of a blank slate. So whether you're looking for single families or multifamily rental properties or for sale properties or commercial asset classes like offices, retail, hotels, or mixed use, and then on the land side, vacant land or surface parking lots, these are basically become the classifications that you can either work with your title company to start to pull records for various properties in an area, to either market to them directly through mailing campaigns, or actually calling property owners that have a commercial site, for example, that's shouldn't be what it is currently, and you want to actually get it approved for something higher and better. So the characteristics that we look for when we're looking at property can be broken down in this list. And in the subsequent slides, we'll actually give examples of what it is that I see as I'm driving through an area to know that there is development potential there. So vacant land is kind of a no-brainer. If there's nothing on the site, something's got to go there. What should go there? And we'll get into project type next, but asset type is really about what are you going to acquire currently. And the current asset class is going to define what type of financing that you are able to get on the property that we'll cover later in the Developer Academy. But this is important for you to start to classify the opportunity at hand. So underutilized land, something with an existing structure on it that you're probably going to demolish and build something completely new. The advantage in here is that if you have an asset already on the site, you'll be able to probably get higher leverage or more debt placed on the property in order to acquire it and then get approvals for something else. Property with excess land to either create new lots or add units is uniquely interesting because you'll be able to have a lot of land to get approved, and then also be left with a productive asset that you'll keep or you'll renovate slightly. And then multifamily or commercial property with value add potential. And this also applies for residential, but usually on the residential side, you'll end up selling the assets, at least in areas that have a very strong case for development as opposed to cash flow. So taking those assets and just improving them and having them be more productive is a great strategy to pursue, especially when you are actually converting an asset. So it's more of a significant value add or an opportunistic development when you're actually talking about conversions. But we'll get into that further in the presentation here. Commercial income property with future development potential. Again, another really interesting way to actually acquire an existing asset that is productive in the short term, but has long-term future upside. So, and again, we'll give you an example of what we've seen here in our local market. But when you find an asset that you can acquire and cash flow over time, say an old office building, but you know that it can go up to a high-rise or be an 8-story or 5-story mixed-use building or something of that sort, it provides for a very interesting return profile, maybe further down the road, 5 or 10 years, but it could provide a significant pop on the back end. Okay, so let's go through just a few examples of, again, opportunities that we see that are kind of no-brainers. So here's a site in downtown Oakland, essentially fenced off. It's overgrown with weeds. It's in the central zone. It's walkable to the BART station and to the downtown activity, but essentially it's just sitting there, vacant, fenced up. So in our mind, something has to go here. So it's a matter of what can we envision to go here based upon the zone, and then how do we find out who owns this site to then contact them and figure out what in the world that they're doing with it. Are they owners that don't have any intention to develop it, where they'll be interested in either selling it to you or partnering with you to get it approved for a higher and better use, and then sell after the entitlements, or even potentially contribute the land to actually build it in the long term? So seeing this as an opportunity, just straight up vacant land. Now, vacant land is arguably the most risky because it doesn't really have anything productive on the site in its current form. But as we'll talk about later in the academy, you'll be able to actually take advantage of these opportunities and reduce your risk by proposing creative solutions to the property owners. Okay, so here's an underutilized piece of land, right? So clearly there are parking cars on this piece of land and probably earning some income, but it's clearly a building that, or clearly a site that should have some sort of building on it. And if you kind of continue the line of the buildings that are already next to it, clearly this should have at least, a ground floor retail space with 2 more stories above. And based upon what we know about this zone, it can support actually many more stories higher to again have residential above the ground floor retail. So as you're starting to drive around your city, and usually most people's eyes don't get drawn to a blank space, but at the end of the day, this becomes a significant opportunity to get something approved to build. So property with excess land, here's a great example of something on Telegraph Avenue. It's next to a brick building, and yet it has a parking lot on the corner. Clearly, a parking lot on a corner lot is not the best use, but that brick building may be a building that stays there, because it's well constructed, and it could be an income generator as you're pursuing the development site on the parking lot. But clearly something is happening here, and figuring out and starting to generate an idea of what to go there, and then starting to contact these property owners is really going to be the task at hand. So property for improvement, whether it's incremental improvement or transformative improvement. This is an example of a building that's basically vacant and underperforming, and it has the potential of being a multitude of different uses that we're excited to pursue. But as you're starting to drive around your city again, you'll start to see buildings that are either really dilapidated or boarded up. Any of those sorts of opportunities are opportunities for development. Now, this is a unique situation here because it essentially would be delivered vacant, where a lot of the times these sort of properties, either multifamily or commercial properties, will have people living in them or working in them. So you have to kind of work within those constraints that you're provided with, which will really be a limiting factor to how much value that you can create. Okay, and then finally, property with future potential. So here's another example of a building in downtown Oakland that is a underutilized, although operating office building with ground floor retail. It is not that architecturally significant, which really in our minds becomes the primary determining factor for whether we see a property being a tear down or something that wants to be preserved in the long term. The buildings to the left are clearly nice buildings that should be there for decades, if not centuries to come. But a property like this, can clearly go up significantly higher given what's right next door to it and in the area that it resides. But it's something that you can acquire, you can cash flow, and then over time get the approval, say 5 or 10 years down the road, in order to have it essentially be demolished and then built back up. Okay, so that covers basically the assets that we are interested in having you and the assets that I am looking for when I'm exploring development potentials. Then it becomes down to what is your big development idea. So at the end of the day, you as a developer need to be a visionary. You need to be able to understand the rules that are currently set out by the zoning, and then you need to get creative at envisioning what a project, what a site has the potential of becoming. And then your role is essentially to take it from its current state to its future state. So we're going to talk about some different types of projects that you can be pursuing depending upon a few different criteria: your risk appetite, your skill set, and your track record. So when we're talking about projects, one of the better ways to determine projects to pursue is a balance between risk and return. So usually we're talking about either value add investments or opportunistic developments. So value add investments become projects that have pretty decent return and the risk is less, usually because you're taking an asset incrementally forward. You're improving it incrementally, or maybe you're adding something additional and you're getting some increased value, but it's not transformative value. Opportunistic development, on the other hand, is riskier, but the returns are much greater. So this is really a spectrum that we are focused on pursuing, but it depends kind of on what your desires are and what properties that you are comfortable pursuing. So opportunistic would be something ground up or a major repositioning for short-term capital appreciation. Essentially, that means you're going to pursue something in the short term, probably invest a significant amount of money to create a new transformative valuation for that project that you've approved. So if it's a ground-up development of a single family, that can be considered opportunistic because you're taking it from, say, there's just a raw piece of land to now a built building. Or you can do something that is an old warehouse and you're converting it into residential loft units. Those sort of major repositionings would definitely fall under the opportunistic category. So the types of projects that essentially we explain to people that they can pursue, either value add or opportunistic, break down into these different categories. So you can either upgrade the property physically or financially, or you can legalize space within inside of the structure, or you can add space out by basically bumping it out, or you can build it up. So every city will have a different requirement to pursue these sorts of value add strategies, but by you understanding how to actually get the approvals for some of these, you'll really be able to differentiate yourself compared to your competitors, because, for example, many times you can add space out without actually going through a more significant review process with the city before they give you your zoning approval. A building department review may be in order for something like that, but it's important to know that there are different approval processes for both zoning and building, and depending upon how much you're going to be doing to create new value, you'll have to internalize that into your risk and reward calculation. Again, we'll be providing more resources in the next session to actually help you further understand how to actually capitalize on these types of opportunities. Opportunistic, on the other hand, is where you can essentially get a new project approved by securing an underutilized or vacant piece of property or a building to demolish and plan it for a higher and better use, or actually build something from the ground up. Maybe it's already approved and then you're going to actually enter in at that phase to try and build it, or repurposing an asset. And one of our favorite strategies is subdivisions. So whether you're pursuing condo conversions, where you're taking an existing asset and you're splitting it up into individual units and not actually selling the land, or you're taking a piece of land, property, and subdividing it into a new separate lot, or you're providing or you're getting approvals for a hybrid version of that, such as a mini lot development, where you're essentially subdividing the land, you're able to sell the underlying land along with the built structure, but get some benefits on the zoning constraints that you'll have to adhere to. And then planned units are as a final, little bit more complicated subdivision approach, where you're essentially creating an entire community in and of itself. So from a project perspective, once you've thought about the types of projects that you want to pursue, then it's a matter of the types of projects themselves. So depending upon what your objective is, whether you're focused on residential or commercial, or you're interested in pursuing projects that are projects to build from the ground up, say a multifamily property or a rental property, to then refinance and hold it, after that period of time when it's been built up and leased, or you're interested in developing, say, townhouses, and you can develop single-family homes and then actually sell each of them individually. You have to get clear, and smart growth, in my mind, definitely includes some sort of residential component. So ideally, you do have some sort of residential component factored into the project, because flat out in the cities across the country, we need more housing for the most part. So, but then it depends on whether you're interested in long-term cash flow or short-term appreciation and earning a significant chunk of money from selling a property. Same thing goes with other commercial real estate, and commercial real estate is definitely a little bit more complicated to enter into as opposed to residential. The residential risk profile is much less versus something like an office or a hotel, but the returns can be significantly greater. And then mixed use types of projects with a experienced operator. So what's really interesting as a developer is you can actually start to find local businesses to partner with, where you can plan a project and factor them into the ground floor retail, for example, from the ground up. So by partnering with other operators, right, and as a developer, you're focused on the real estate versus the actual operations for the most part. You can step into that operator role as opposed to the developer role, but it is a completely different business model. And as we've said earlier in the presentation, there are interesting new ways of developing real estate with something like shipping containers, where there's pop-up retail, or privately owned public open spaces, or POPs, as they've been referred to, where it takes a little bit more creativity, and maybe you're raising both public funding and private funding in order to provide open space that has multiple streams of revenue. Okay, so just to leave us on an example project here, this would be an example of a project where you can find a vacant piece of land, ideally close to a fixed rail station, ideally, and these are kind of all the ideal characteristics, but it would be great if it was on a commercial corridor that could actually sustain ground floor retail. Maybe it's an area that needs office space as well, so maybe the space, the floor above the ground floor retail could also be office space that could be rented out to a local business, and then all the subsequent floors above would be residential. Now, it's important to know, and we'll get into this later in the presentation, that there are other building constraints, as we've talked about. There's zoning constraints and building constraints. So depending upon how many floors that you want to go, you will be triggering a different construction type that would affect the cost of construction. And we'll be providing a financial model later in the course here, where you'll be able to actually start to factor in both the yield potential, or the ability to rent or sell units, and then how much is actually going to cost to get there. And so there's opportunities to add open space, say on the rooftop. In my mind, rooftops are pretty underutilized spaces that need to either be used for open space or for some sort of solar canopy, and then factoring in electric vehicle infrastructure. If it's in the right location, again, quarter mile of a fixed rail station, you probably don't need as much parking, right, to encourage people to use alternative, more sustainable sources of transportation. And then maybe providing bike stores and different amenities. So by, again, having a program in mind of the type of developments that you want to promote, hopefully in line with the smart growth principles that we've defined, you can basically guide your development professionals to factor this into their design. And so a developer working with an architect, that becomes kind of the interaction that will really enable you to plan out projects, get them approved, and even just sell those approvals into the marketplace. And if you've designed it in such a way that has really thought through all of these different criteria and is in the right place, the likelihood of another developer from probably out of the area coming in and saying, oh, that's a project that I would love to actually build. You're basically, at this point, from finding an opportunity and getting a project approved, is really about the vision that you're setting in place. So the better vision that you can have about a smart growth development project, the more attractive it's going to be from another developer who's interested in carrying out your vision. So at the end of the day, this is the type of skill that we're trying to promote people to cultivate. It's seeing opportunity and then actually seeing what the potential is and then getting approvals for that potential vision. Okay, so we're going to open it up for questions, and but before we do, I'm just going to quickly run down some of the homework assignments that I'd like to have you pursue before next week. This presentation will be recorded and uploaded to the Kajabi platform, so you can go back and review it yourself. And we'll be uploading the foot traffic ahead report, as well as a list of walk-ups, so you can actually start to see what neighborhoods, probably in your local area, have been designated as these types of places. I'm also going to want you to download your city's zoning map. This is going to be probably one of the most important things that you start to get to know in order to, again, start to see development potential, right? Because when you're driving down the street, there's no signs that say you're now entering into this zone. So the more that you can really get refined in your ability to actually understand where things are in relationship to the zone, the more that you'll be able to monitor the market and actually immediately pursue a project when it comes up, or start to reach out to property owners. And again, we'll go into the marketing approaches for sourcing these opportunities in the subsequent sessions. I also want you to download your city's published plans. So again, you need to kind of align with a city. At the end of the day, as I was advised when I first got started, you need to really differentiate yourself by going deep into understanding a market. So pick a city and pull the zoning map and the published plans. And then I want you to start to identify potential development sites. I often use Google Maps to actually just start to drop pins on the map and use the Google Street View to actually just go street by street and start to look for potential sites. As you start to mark those sites, either for value-add investments or opportunistic developments, you can then go back future or later in the Developer Academy, and we can start to implement some of the strategies of how you actually reach out to that property owner and pitch a potential development with them. But the idea here is that you want to start to cultivate a vision for what you would deem as something that should stay and maybe should be improved, right, value add, or something that either needs to be torn down and built back up or built up in the first place. So that's really the task at hand, is to start to apply what we've just talked about and start to think about where you would develop property in your local area and what sites pose opportunity to pursue. Welcome everybody to the Building Wealth and Creating Impact with Real Estate Development